Hey there, got your message about how to tell the signs. So let me go back to the question three, and then I'll do question eight that I'm actually posting this on, because they both have the same step in terms of figuring out what those signs need to be, but they factor really differently. So it'll give me a chance to point that out as well. So let me get this written: 3x squared plus 9x minus 12. Okay, so first step for all factoring problems is look for a GCF, because hopefully there is one. And if you get that out of your way, it always makes the problem easier. Something that can look really, really terrible, once you get the GCF out of the way, it can be pretty straightforward. And if you miss the GCF, people almost always don't successfully factor the problem. So super important step, look for a GCF. And in this case, it's just what you said. It's going to be 3. The other thing that I see people do is write the 3 there and then like try to factor to the answer immediately. That is a terrible plan because you can't see what you have. So make sure you always write this step where you have the GCF and then you have whatever is left, and like write that step out so that visually you can see exactly what you're aiming for and you're not trying to do it in your head. Because again, I see people get stuck there and miss it just because they kind of get lost in their handwriting. So another thing you do here is kind of distribute back and make sure you didn't make any errors, which is what I was just doing, and that looks good. So now we're at, this leads with the 1 now in front, the part that I'm trying to factor. So that means I just need two numbers that multiply to be the number on the end and add to be the number on the middle. And so with a -4, I could have 1 and 4, or I could have 2 and 2, right? Because those are the only things that multiply to be -4. And then one of those numbers, one of the pairs has to be negative for it to be multiplied to be a negative. So if, I think for yours you had the negative on the 4, right? So if I did that, and I put the negative right there, 1 times -4 does multiply to be -4, but 1 plus -4 doesn't add to be 3. So that's what I was saying, it has to add to be that middle term. And that's adding back to that middle term is how you know which of the pairs is the right one. So if I put the negative on the 1, -1 times 4 still makes -4 in the end, but -1 plus 4 makes the +3. And then what I was saying in my message is it doesn't matter what order you write the factors in. So I could write this, or I could write that, but the negative has to be on the 1 and the positive has to be on the 4. And then just to remind you why, if I FOIL back, x times x would be, put that 3 in front so I don't lose it, x times x would be x squared, x times -1 gives me -x, 4 times x gives me +4x, 4 times -1 gives me, does not give me a +4, it gives me a -4. And this is why it has to add to be the middle, is because eventually it's going to when you FOIL back. So -x plus 4x would be +3x, which is what we needed that to be. And then there's the -4 on the end that we needed. And then I could distribute the 3 back and I'd be back here where I started. But so that's the drill, is it has to multiply to the number on the end and add to the number in the middle while being careful with the signs. So that's that one. Let me go back here now and grab this one. So this one, same first step. Looks like we do have a common factor in there. -8. So we'll get that out of the way first, which will definitely make this a fair bit easier. So it looks like 2 is the best I could do there, but even a 2 is helpful. I'll show you why here in a second. 2 goes into that one 3 times, and 2 goes into -8 minus 4 times. So our step here that is similar to what we just looked at is when this is just a plain x squared that we're working with, and that greatest common factor is out of the way, so we stop worrying about that now. I like to just draw an arrow to remind myself not to put it back at the end when I'm done factoring so I don't lose the 2. But other than that, I'm just going to ignore it. If this is just an x squared, we'd be kind of the same thing. What multiplies to negative 4 and adds to be 3. But with this number in front, now I have to account for that number. So what we do is we do what a times c, or the first times the last, 10 times negative 4 to get negative 40. And now we ask ourselves the same question that we did on that earlier problem. What multiplies to be negative 40 and adds to be positive 3? So for 40, there are a few choices. 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 3 doesn't go in, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. And then 6, 7, I'm back at 8. So that's all my possible pairs. I need these to add to be a positive 3. And remember, since this is negative, one of them is going to be negative, one is going to be positive. When we're doing that, we're actually looking for the space between the numbers, because if it was, say, add to be 18, it would be a negative 2 and a positive 20, because that would add to be 18. So 18 would be the space between the numbers, just because of the signs. And so with this 3, I can look at it and go, it's going to have to be the 5 and the 8, because I can make those add to 3 with one of them being negative. I would need the 5 to be the negative. Negative 5 plus 8 does make positive 3. Negative 5 times 8 does make negative 40. And that's it in terms of finding those numbers. Like, they literally have to multiply to be either what's on the end if it leads with a 1, or a times c if there's a non-1 coefficient on the x squared term. Once you have those, there's a couple of ways that you can factor. I'm going to show the 4-term grouping one, but you can also use magic method if you preferred that version. And this is where I'm just going to rewrite this middle term using these 2 numbers that I found right here. So this is the exact same thing as I have above. It's just, instead of writing it as plus 3x, I'm writing it as minus 5x plus 8x, which is still plus 3x. But what that lets me do is the grouping, the 4-term grouping that we saw in the first section of this chapter. From these 2, it looks like my greatest common factor would be a 5x, and that's going to leave me a 2x minus 1. And then I always like to just kind of distribute back and make sure I didn't mess anything up. So 5x times 2x, there's our 10x squared. 5x times negative 1, that's negative 5x. And then from 8x and 4, I can take out a 4. And then that's going to leave me another 2x minus 1. 4 times 2x, there's our 8x. 4 times negative 1, there's our negative 4. If you do this right, these, and you have the right numbers, these 2 factors are always going to match. So that will leave 2x minus 1. It allows me to factor that out front. And 5x plus 4 is what's left behind. And then there's that little arrow reminding me to put my 2 back. You can write it all the way down as well. It just gets a little messy with the parentheses, and I find people find that a little confusing. So sometimes I'll just do a little arrow as my reminder. This is basically how you factor any of these ones where it has a coefficient out front and it's not the kind with the perfect squares on the ends. And this will work every time, assuming it does factor. Not everything factors. We'll get to that in another chapter. I think it's chapter 9. But finding these numbers multiplies to be the 2 ends, the negative 40 adds to be the middle. And assuming it factors, the answer is in there. And there's only one thing that's going to work. There's only one thing that will come back to that middle term. And they're hard to find for, like, I've done like thousands of these. So for me, I can spot them pretty easy. It's pretty normal for students to have a harder time finding these. But if you keep looking, it's there. You just have to go down the list until you get the signs and the numbers to work out correctly to that middle term. Hopefully that helps. This is hard. This is probably one of the harder things we do this quarter, is the style of factoring. So do some more of them and you'll get better at finding numbers. And at least if you know the process, again, even if it takes you a few minutes to get through it, there's only one right answer, and it's in that list. So Holler if you have more questions on that, but I feel like that's kind of what I had to say on it.